Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening and welcome to the April 26, 2021 Park Board meeting, losing track of decades. And first of all, I kind of would like to start with the approval of minutes, and my new way of doing this kind of expedites things. So has everybody had an opportunity to review minutes? And any comments or concerns for corrections? And if not, is there any objection to the approval of minutes? Not seeing any objections, so I hereby approve minutes from our last meeting in March. Before we get started, actually, I'm going to do roll call now, and then I'll bring Jeff in for a minute. So I want to do roll call with all of the board members. Please just, I don't know that you're muted because that's controlled by Melissa in this new process, but if you are, unmute yourself and just say here when I call your name. Chris?
Here, present.
Linda?
Here.
Ruben? See that hand, Ruben?
Here.
Here we are. Jonathan?
Here.
Marlene?
Here.
Okay, thanks everyone for that. Well, we have some disturbing news, which I think all of you are well aware of, and Jeff is going to say a few words before we get started with our meeting. So Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I certainly don't have anything formal, but wanted to recognize the loss of our dear friend and fellow park board member, Carl Reese, passed away. Carl had shared with me a couple months ago that he had was not going to seek reappointment. This would have been Carl's last meeting with us. He knew he had a medical procedure coming up and was sort of looking forward to his next chapter after that. I think through a series of tragic events, we were notified a couple weeks ago with his family that Carl passed away. I so appreciated Carl's service here with the park board. We always knew we'd get an honest opinion and position from Carl. He really had a heart for Issaquah, and just wanted to recognize him, not only for his service, but just who he was as a person. So Brad, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, but I'd love to ask for a moment of silence before we continue on with the meeting.
Nothing. You said it very eloquently, Jeff. You know, he will be missed, and like you said, he was a very valued member of the board. On behalf of the board, I just want to send condolences to his family. I know he had a few children, and I know how rough this has got to be for them. So in light of this, please let's have 30 seconds of silence on behalf of the passing of Carl. Okay, that's a rough way to start a meeting, but certainly we wanted to acknowledge this recent event. So moving forward, our next item on the agenda here is public comments. Do we have anybody that signed up, Melissa, to make any comments?
Yes, I have Connie Marsh with her hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and promote her up. And I also have Jeremy Noble, who's on the attendee list, so I'm going to add him up to the group as well. Just one moment.
Okay.
Okay, Jeremy's been added. Connie, you have the floor.
Okay, well, I'll start off with Carl. Well, shoot, people should live for frickin' ever, don't you think? I mean, why do we have to die? It's craziness. Change that, Jeff. Yeah, right? Okay, so now public comment, which is going to seem sort of you know, normal. And because I'm going to talk about stormwater, because I just love stormwater. Because stormwater is basically all of our water. It falls from the sky and it hits everything, and then it all drains down toward Lake Sammamish, and it impacts everything in its way. And if it's not going, that's a problem. If too much is happening, that's also a problem. It impacts us, it impacts our habitat. Now, the city of Issaquah has long held stormwater as something that we should control. So we armored our streams and we've piped our stormwater. We've even very recently buried stormwater because it was convenient. So tonight it sounds like that they are asking you to make an opinion on how rigorously and strongly we should prioritize stormwater as a thing to make it better. And so I posed the question, who are we making it better for? Are we going to continue our pathway forward to make it better for people? And what that has done is it has eroded our habitat substantially. We have armored our creeks, and then we've disarmored our creeks, and then because we conveniently want to put a bridge in, then we created a buttress and armored the same place. We just got rid of the armoring. And it looks to me like this year we have maybe 4 different stream armoring projects because the high water started eroding our streams. And several of these are in parks. Now, do we actually want to keep the streams from meandering as they are supposed to do in order to create a variety of habitat? I think we need to stop. You know, if you look over at the state park where all the water wants to go, we've channelized the creek, we're constantly manipulating the situation. Sometimes you just have to let it go to create the habitat so that we can save our environment, which is a priority with this town. So with parks, as we do allow stormwater facilities in parks, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, I think you need to create policies, because the policies have not been changed yet in advance of the stormwater master plan. So it sounds like they're going to be going sort of simultaneously. Shocking. I think you need to create some policies that mandate that stormwater facilities in parks become a community asset, that they are something that adds to a park, not just a place for water to be treated or held. Issaquah Highlands is a gorgeous example of this, right? You go up there, you have huge ponds, you have trails around the ponds, but many of the ponds are just naked. They are naked because in the past, the stormwater people did not want things around their ponds because they dumped leaves. It was higher maintenance and on and on. So I think we need to change how we look at this whole scenario. You guys have sort of the parks purview, and also you often end up with the parks land being the stream enhancements that this group also includes in their master plans. So I don't know if the Parks Department has ever discussed these particular improvements in the list and how they have worked over time. I think that would be an interesting education. So last pitch, yes, more for the natural. I think we can do both at the same time. We can make it better for man and better for natural, but I'm aiming more toward the systems for habitat and less for the convenience of man. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. I appreciate your comments. Not a surprise. So, Melissa, anybody else from the community that would like to make a comment this evening?
Not at this time.
Okay, we will close public comments at this time and move on to regular business. We have 3 items on the agenda this evening. We're going to have a presentation about the Lake Sammamish Trails Plan. We are going to have a presentation about stormwater, the stormwater plan, and a presentation on the 6-year CIP. And Melissa, if you could join in David Kapler and Jennifer at this time, I'd appreciate it so that they can make comments with Bill if they need to.
You got it. They're coming up to the panelist list. Here you go.
So welcome, David, and welcome, Jen. Appreciate your attendance this evening. And Bill, we'll pass this over to you. And Jennifer Fink is going to manage your PowerPoint for you here this evening, which you did very nicely put together. There's about 22 screens, I believe, is what it was. And so, Jennifer, if you could get that started, I'd appreciate that. Looks like we're getting started, and there we are. So, Bill, I will pass this on to you and just let Jen know when you would like to have a screen advanced for your discussion. Go ahead, Bill. Bill muted. We need to unmute him. Anything going on?
As a panelist, Bill should be able to unmute himself.
Okay.
There you
There
are, Bill.
I got you.
We can hear you now, Bill. Go ahead.
I just got bumped.
You're good. We can see you. We can hear you.
Oh, you can. I can't see you. I guess I'll just wing it with what I'm doing here.
Can you see the presentation, Bill?
No, I can't. I might have bumped something. Should I bump the Cisco WebEx again, or what am I?
Yeah, try going down to your toolbar at the bottom and see if you can find the screen on your Internet Explorer.
So I click the screen. It says Cisco WebEx add.
What browser are you using? Chrome or Firefox or Edge?
No, I've been on the whole time till I got bumped. Okay, here, maybe this is going to do it. All right. Can you hear me now?
I can, but we got an echo here, Bill, for some reason.
Great.
Any idea, Jennifer, what would cause the echo?
He's in the list. He's in twice, Brad. So I've muted the duplicate for him.
That should do it.
Go ahead, Bill. Can we hear you now?
Sure. Can you? Sounds like an echo again. How about now?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have an echo. Melissa, is it possible to excuse one of Bill's? Bill, somehow you're on the WebEx now twice, and so we're getting a reverb.
Yeah, let me go ahead and demote that extra one. Hold on one second.
And just as I was telling you, Bill, that we had all this worked out and things should be flawless, here we go.
Yeah, it looks like you've removed one, but I'm still in echo.
Any luck, Melissa?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to, he would have to close out. It might be best for him to just close all the way out and then come back in. Thanks. I just saw Chris's note too. That would probably be the best approach at this point.
Yep.
So in light of that, I'm wondering if we want to make a little bit of a shift in the agenda and maybe bring on the stormwater folks rather than to wait for Bill to come back in.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that same thing, Brad. It's your pleasure. That's a great idea.
So why don't you go ahead and X out of the PowerPoint. That looks good, Jennifer. And let's bring in Gary and Alan here to talk about the stormwater plan at this time. And then when that'll be done in 30 minutes, and then by that time, we should be able to have Bill back in and move forward with that. So I don't know which of you two is leading the show here, but Gary, why don't you say a few words?
Certainly. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure everybody can see the PowerPoint screen that I'm sharing.
Yes, can.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that intro, and I'm glad we could jump in here. So good evening, board members. It's my first presentation to you, hopefully one of many. My name again is Gary Shimmick, the relatively new Utilities and Engineering Manager here at the city. My colleague and I, Alan Quinn, are here today to discuss the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan update, and in addition, seek your feedback on the plan. While I've only been working here in Issaquah 90 days, I have been in the water resources and environmental engineering field for nearly 3 decades. Prior to joining Issaquah, I served as a utilities manager for the city of Redmond for 6 years, and then was a senior drainage and wastewater manager for Seattle Public Utilities for 13 years. And of course, I should not go any further without noting that my family and I have enjoyed the wonderful outdoors, parks, food and beverages, and entertainment, and all that Issaquah has to offer since the early 90s. So I'm very happy to be working here. On that note, let's look at tonight's agenda. Here. There we go. A little bit. Purpose tonight is to provide an overview of the methodology to develop the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan. And as I have mentioned, seek your feedback on the plan and in general, and also 3 specific questions. I will tee up those questions in a few minutes after we look at as the first agenda topic. After we get to those questions or the input we're looking for, briefly provide an overview of stormwater issues that Issaquah really and most cities have been and are facing now, and very similar to what Connie actually talked about in her opening statements. I've included this stormwater overview or Stormwater 101 as an agenda item based on feedback that we received from the Environmental Board earlier this month. Alan and I will then provide an overview on our work to date, next steps, and then seek your feedback. So what we're looking for tonight, in addition to any general comments you might have, is your feedback on 3 particular issues. First one that, again, Connie talked about, what priority stormwater issues are most important to address for the entire city in your perspective and for parks. Maybe they're one and the same. Second question, what are your thoughts on our criteria to prioritize issues and solutions? Alan will be going over that slide. And then at the very end, come back to me and how aggressive should we be in addressing climate change. So this is a little teaser here, and we'll come back to these at the end of the formal presentation, but please keep this in mind as we go along. So again, before we jump into the master plan, I'd like to provide context in relation to stormwater runoff, stormwater pollution, and potential solution sets to both those issues. So as we moved from forested to rural and then to urban land use here in Issaquah, and of course everywhere else in our region, there were unanticipated negative consequences related to stormwater. As the graphic at the top left, as you face the screen, shows, only a small portion of rainfall converts to stormwater runoff under forested conditions. About 90% of rainfall under these forested conditions either infiltrates or is utilized and processed by trees, shrubs, plants. The remaining, about 10% is stormwater runoff. Now, these percentages change drastically as land use moves from forested to urban conditions, whereby stormwater runoff increases from about 10% to 55% on any given parcel of property. And without proactive measures, this increase in stormwater runoff results in increased peak flows and thereby flooding, increased bank erosion and channel scour, and thereby sediment loading, and finally increased pollutant loading because stormwater collects and conveys chemicals and debris into our stormwater systems and local water bodies. The graph on the lower right as you face the screen attempts to show that the time between the onset of rain and the peak flood flow is also decreased under urban conditions. All these impacts I described are really the result of a lack of natural storage and treatment for the rain. In forested condition, rain is stored in the soils, trees, and plants rather than being converted to runoff. And the rainfall is treated when it's infiltrated by the soil and associated microorganisms. Now, another thing, Connie just did a great job in teeing this up. These physical changes, as they occur, the runoff increases have direct effects on humans and aquatic species. Even with my limited time here at Issaquah at the city, I'm keenly aware of the serious impacts to residential homes and businesses due to flooding. I'm also aware of beach closures in the greater Seattle area due to high pollutant concentrations. And most of us are all aware of declining fish populations, not only in our region, but in our own Issaquah watersheds due to the many factors we've talked about, including excessive flooding, water quality declines, lack of habitat, and lack of food sources for the fish populations. So let's focus just a bit on water quality impacts before we talk about possible short and long-term solutions to these serious problems. Now, both the graphics here, the bullet list and the little schematic, basically tell the same story. There are many possible sources of water pollution in our urban landscape. Most common solutions is what's kind of shown in the list on bottom right. Street runoff from a host of automobile components, road salt, industrial waste, pesticides, fertilizers, pet yard waste, trash, and then rooftop driveway runoff and leaky septics. Now, the good part of this bad news is that the loading of many of these pollutants that you see here into our environment may be significantly reduced by changing day-to-day practices at work and at home. The same good news holds true for volumes of runoff and peak flows. On that note, let us briefly look into the solutions sets that we may have to address these serious issues. So just a reminder, as a society, we began to better understand the stormwater related impacts of moving from a forested to urban landscape, probably, back in the 1960s. The National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, NPDES permit program began to address water pollution by regulating sources that discharge pollutants into the waters of the United States. Created in 1972 by the Clean Water Act, this NPDES permit program is authorized to state governments by EPA to perform many permitting, administrative, and enforcement aspects of the program. Now, much time has elapsed and many lessons have been learned since 1972 and the creation of that act. The existing focus of this NPDES permit regulations that are geared to reduce the impacts of the stormwater runoff, which kind of our solution set are the following. Stormwater planning, public education and outreach, public involvement and participation. I know that's near and dear to many of your hearts. Storm system mapping and documentation, illicit discharge detection, controlling runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction sites, operations and maintenance, good housekeeping, source control programs, and then the evaluation of total maximum daily loads and monitoring and assessment programs. So that's a portfolio of, regulations, but they're also solutions. Last thing on this, couple things on this slide before we jump to the master plan. The actions on the top left as you're facing the screen are something we can all do, at home and at businesses, in little ways that actually can make a difference. Just tick off a few here: cover piles of dirt, mulch, yard waste, and other debris. Direct downspouts away from paved surfaces, clean roof gutters. Check vehicles for leaks. Cover trash containers, clean up pet waste. So, these are big problems that we have, but there are a lot of small things that we can do in addition to the big capital programs and projects. And then in the bottom right, I just found this while I was doing some research for this presentation, and this is a three phases approach for cities to consider. I'll summarize, but the first point here is adopting a long-term approach, including capital programs, capital improvement plans and master plans, which we're speaking about today. Managing stormwater close to where precipitation falls. And then finally, a little bit again, back to Connie here, innovative technologies that can provide benefits beyond stormwater, such as community amenities, air quality, still be very cost effective and still have a drainage and legal nexus to solving our problems. Okay, now we jump to the master plan. So I'm hoping that little Stormwater 101 that I gave and didn't give to the environmental board will help out for the rest of this presentation as a kind of a grounding board. So desired outcomes. We're hoping that this plan and then implementation of this plan achieves the following: a roadmap, or basically a living document that will help us reduce flooding, improve water quality and habitat across the city, and the document that will be reviewed over time on a regular basis. Clear and concise policy direction from which we can build projects and programs under this umbrella. And again, we're going to be seeking some direction from you tonight. Smart goals and performance targets that we can track and report on transparently over time. A very clear list of priority actions, not only capital projects, but operating programs, maintenance activities that we can, again, hold ourselves accountable to implement. Of course, compliance with the NPDES permit that I mentioned, and then also compliance with the Department of Ecology grant requirements that we receive to develop a watershed scale plan. And to be clear, this grant is a mechanism that will allow us as a city to go beyond the basic permit requirements for doing just one basin to looking at all our basins. So a big shout out to the Department of Ecology for the grant, and to Alan and his team for writing a great application, that won us some dollars. I thought it would be helpful to provide a summary of some plans, guidelines, codes that may influence our work or may be influenced by our work. And I've broken these down into two categories: the city and then regional federal. And I think this will, I'm not going to go over all of these, I'll call out a couple, but I think this will help us all ground ourselves in realizing this is going to be a very collaborative plan across the city and across the region. We're going to be seeking a lot of input. So just some of the plans that I'll call out here that we need to be in alignment with of our city comprehensive plan, city strategic plan, and then of course park strategic plan, green necklace plan, central Issaquah and Old Town plans, and others. And in regards to regional and federal efforts, any city and county plans that exist and are related to stormwater, our water resource inventory area plans, and then WashDOT and FEMA program rules and guidelines. And then my final slide before handing it off to Alan here is a overview of our schedule. So let's just highlight a few things here. I know there's a lot going on. But as we briefly touched upon, the work has been going on since 2009 and has included identification of citywide flooding, water quality, and habitat issues through stakeholder engagement and internal workshops. We've also documented existing basin physical conditions such as water quality and flow through comprehensive research of existing data and documents. And what lies ahead through the rest of this year into early 2022 is the development of policy directives that are consistent with the city's strategic and comprehensive plans, as I mentioned, the long-term goals and associated performance measures, and the priority actions, again, that are not only projects, but programs and activities and policies. And stakeholder engagement, as we're doing tonight, is going to continue committed to you and others through the rest of this project. Now, this includes multiple touch points with City Council, external and internal stakeholders, and then 3 city boards beyond the Parks Board. That's Policy and Planning Commission, Economic Vitality Commission, and then, of course, the Environmental Board. And then finally, as you can see, we're hoping to have the plan for adoption to City Council in first quarter 2022. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Quinn to highlight our stakeholder engagement work.
Great, thank you, Gary. Yeah, my name is Alan Quinn, Senior Stormwater Engineer with the City of Issaquah. Just a quick background on myself. I've been with the City of Issaquah for 2.5 years. I have about 27 years total in stormwater management, working in that field, so quite a while. Before Issaquah, I worked for the City of Rancho Cordova in California, and then 17 years at the City of Renton before that. I grew up in Bellevue, raised in Bellevue, but have fond memories of Issaquah and the salmon days, and so it's a, you know, near and dear to my heart. I also lived in the Issaquah Highlands back in 1999 to 2007, so one of the first residents up in the Highlands when that development was built back in 1998, and then moved back to Bellevue to raise my family. So just a quick background on that. So start with the slide, stakeholder engagement slide. So there was an extensive amount of outreach that the city conducted. We reached out to the key stakeholders and identified those stakeholders. And back in late 2019, internal and external stakeholder kickoff meeting included all external agencies such as WashDOT, King County, Snoqualmie Tribe, WDFW, Ecology, as well as key departments in the city. We had Parks Department, Operations Department, and that was sort of, I gave an orientation for about 2 hours, describing what we're trying to do, our goals for the Stormwater Surface Water Master Plan. And as part of that meeting, we had a sort of a, people could, not slides, but we had these paper charts where people could go up to and mark and identify problems, had maps of the city, and they could provide input as to where they saw issues. So we had a good idea, geographical area of where people were seeing problems, both in terms of water quality, water flow, and habitat. And then in early 2020, we did our community outreach, the second phase of our engagement. And that was we decided to do an online survey and a mapping tool. Our communications team decided that was the best way to reach out to communities, as opposed to having, like a school, elementary school. Often you don't get a lot of participation at those events, so the online we thought was the way to go. So we did, media blasts and had set up survey questions for community to answer and respond to. And I got a fairly good response. We had about 74 respondents, which is considered relatively good for this type of engagement. And then here's some of the survey questions we asked were, one was, where have you seen flooding in your community? And have you noticed any long-term changes in water flow in creeks and water quality? And then in addition to the questions, folks could online, there's a map that was available that people could mark on the map exactly where they had problems. So we had a geo-referenced, so we had the problems and then the location of those problems, and then people could comment. And so we have all that information, all that data available. And then we did a council briefing, and then COVID's hit, and then we decided against having a formal council meeting, and then instead we did a council outreach memo. So basically a 4-page memo to council explaining, what we're doing, why we're doing it. And that occurred in April in 2020. We finally got that to the council. So basically what we did, an important part of this survey was that we needed that to inform our watershed characterization studies that we were doing. So that's like the first phase of the master plan, was to first identify what are the problems in the city through various sources, the community and our operations department, and use that information to come up with a list of all the problems. And then from that, we could then prioritize those problems as part of the second phase. So, before I forget, we did also have and it speaks to this meeting, we did have 2 outreach meetings specifically with Parks Department. So with Jennifer and Jeff, we had a meeting to discuss the Old Town community neighborhood and what we could do for addressing the significant stormwater issues in Old Town. And that work involved looking at options for utilizing parks. And this speaks to Connie's comment earlier that, try to, where we can collaborate with the parks and have a joint use facility. We were looking at that and that's certainly, and that's something that we wanted to make sure, we're all on board with, and Parks is okay with that concept, where we could have a park and potentially use that for a stormwater facility. But, so we had a lot of discussion on that. And so I thought that was a great collaboration meeting. And lastly, we want to look at future engagement. We're going to look at policy decisions that we need to, for addressing participation patterns due to climate change and other goals, and strategies and actions and programs to achieve those goals and strategies. Next slide. So the basin characterization report was actually a significant effort that was that our consultant helped prepare for, and for the master plan. That was there's 5 basins within the city that we were looking at, and so determining the existing conditions in those basins with regard to what is the flow, what is the water quality of those basins, and then what's the issue with habitat. So we took all the known issues from all of our research. We did a lot of working with we had hydraulic models that we updated, and we had a huge amount of water quality monitoring data that we were able to utilize and put into the reports. That helped us identify water quality trends, and then based on that, we could assess the influences of the land use on each of the basins. Next slide. And here's some of just a real simple table that shows, identifies for each of the basins, what we saw in terms of flow issues, water quality, habitat erosion, and maintenance. So these are all what came out of the survey that we conducted. So you can kind of see the number of issues, particularly Issaquah Creek is a more problematic basin. And so that's where we're going to, focus a lot of our efforts. Next slide. And then lastly, so what's going to come out of these characterization reports is then a suite of solutions to solve the problems that we've identified. And to come up with those suite of solutions, we need to be able to, prioritize those, and what are the metrics we're going to use for prioritizing all the possible solutions. And so here's some prioritization metrics that for consideration by the board. One is effectiveness at solving, how effective is it in solving the particular problem at hand? And the 3 main problems, as I said, are water flow, water quality, and habitat. Land ownership, is it privately owned, publicly owned? How easy is it to construct? Permitting issues, extensive permitting involved. Obviously costs and funding opportunities, where we can get grants and so forth. Timing and coordination with other projects within the city and other partnerships, Mountains to Sounds, and the nonprofits, working with them. And of course, does it meet regulatory requirements, in particular MPDS Phase 2 permit? And then of course, considering environmental and social justice, and want to make sure that we, we're equitably, these projects are solving problems in all of the communities in the city, and making sure that disadvantaged communities are can realize the benefits of some of our solutions. And then lastly, what downstream benefits to Lake Sammamish, and how can we improve the water quality and habitat at the state park. And I think it's the last slide, and then I guess Gary takes over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. So I'm going to finish off the presentation here, the formal presentation, by speaking very briefly about our climate change approach options, and then we'll get question and answers and your feedback questions. One of them is based on this topic. So just for grounding, the latest predictions that I'm aware of on how climate change might impact regional precipitation patterns and therefore stormwater runoff include a likelihood of these high duration, short intensity storm events, and a slight increase in summer precipitation totals and a corresponding decrease in winter. Now, the greater likelihood in these high duration, short intensity events may impact storm and surface water management in very tangible ways: higher peak flows, greater erosive forces in our streams, and decreased water quality due to greater sediment input. There are also, of course, potential changes to temperature patterns that might impact riparian and wetland flora and fauna. So this master plan will include a proposed approach to address the impacts of climate change based on best available science. Now, currently there is no mandated plan that Issaquah must take. So I'd like to describe 4 options at a very high level that we are considering, and again, we'll get your feedback on. First is basically no action unless required until predictions about the impacts are more certain, or until other communities adopt strategies and policies that have defined actions that we could maybe work with. Option 2 is a minimal proactive approach. Now, this could consider design standard changes for new projects based on a better understanding of how regional precipitation may change. Option 3 is a moderate proactive approach, would again include the pieces with the minimal approach, but also could talk about retrofitting existing stormwater facilities to new design standards. We could also investigate real-time control of stormwater facilities to optimize storage, and potentially illustrate what a future 100-year floodplain might look like on Issaquah Creek. Now, on the very high end of the scale, aggressive proactive approach would, in addition to everything we just talked about, would also include, or potentially include, things like working with UW or another research institute to develop Issaquah-specific precipitation time series that we can use to better understand what may happen in our area. We could also look at not only developing that 100-year future floodplain, but actually regulating it based on the best available science. So that's the gamut that we are looking at, and we will be requesting your feedback on. So that is a segue to just open it up now for Alan and I, but also back to these the feedback questions here. Again, the first one is just off the cuff what you guys would like to see, and then the second 2, again, we had slides, so we can go back to those if need be. So Brad, I'll let you decide how you want to move on from here.
Well, let's see here if we have any comments or questions from any board members to begin with. Ruben, I see your hand up. Go ahead, Ruben. Ruben, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
I wanted to go back to that one slide that showed things residents could do. I think it was do it yourself. It was.
Yes.
It was in the upper left-hand corner.
Yes.
Yeah, how we can help. I was wondering, when I first moved to Issaquah 30-something years ago, the real estate agent handed me a little packet of Welcome to Issaquah, something put up by the city, or was dropped off on my porch, that had all these resources. I don't know if that's something we would want to consider. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is there are things that I could do and I think they wouldn't be that hard, but I'm not really sure how to do them. And there's two options. I can get a resource that's written, or if somebody could put together. I use YouTube a lot, you know, how to fix this, how to fix that. If there was a resource that could be either animated or sort of a YouTube podcast that might show helping you do certain things. Like I saw that one about running your gutters off the pavement. Well, almost all my gutters were built to go onto the pavement. So I'm trying to figure it, you know, how could I do something like that? So it'd be helpful to have some kind of resource that at least give me some ways to look at it, how to do it, and make sure I'm doing it correctly. Again, nothing extraordinarily difficult, but things that would be easy to do.
That's
So
great.
one recommendation is if there's any kind of a resource site or location where you could see, here's the things you could do. When somebody buys a house, maybe they get a packet of resources the city provides as a new homeowner, blah, 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 blah. You know, here's things you can do. I mean, I'm looking at even simple things like where I live in my neighborhood. Most of us don't have fences. Like people are starting to cut down trees, either legally or illegally, I don't know. And so I'm trying to figure out how do I plant something, not to replace the tree, but to at least create some barrier and some element of water containment.
Thank you, Ruben. I two things there, just real quick. One, I know we have a lot of good information, you know, in our public works engineering, probably, you know, even beyond that. So I will get that to Jennifer, maybe to pass along as it makes sense. And the second, we've also had similar comments to yours, and we're actually embarking on creating a Stormwater 101 video, hopefully today, that you know, some of your ideas really, you know, resonate with me and what we could potentially do. So we'll keep you in the loop on that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? I'm having to kind of scroll through here to see if I see any raised hands. You could also actually say something in chat if you want to be called upon. Looks like a pretty quiet crowd here this evening. I guess my only comment to you guys primarily would be I'm in support of Connie's comments, certainly. But certainly we also have to find balance, and we can't necessarily totally, you know, weigh everything towards the environment completely in an urban development area. So to try and find win-win solutions would certainly be my suggestion, if there is such a thing. I'm not an engineer, so I leave it to you guys to figure that out. But it seems like we really need to weigh heavily upon the environment, but certainly not necessarily you know, at the expense of urban development either. So, you know, that's the challenge, I guess, before you.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, Brad, and that's something that, you know, just so you know, we have a fairly extensive, well, not too extensive, but a 12 or 13 member internal stakeholder team, and Jennifer's part of that. So you know, we're looking at policies now, so we will definitely work with some language that Connie and you kind of talked about here, that balancing. And I think that holds to, you know, the parks, public works relationship, but also the city as a whole, the balance to the environment and development. So I like your you know, use of that word balance. So I think you'll see something like that from us. Well, I can guarantee we will float that up through our team here on both those issues.
You know, as far as climate change, you know, I think we need to be as aggressive as funding will allow in terms of future planning in that regard. You know, I think there's a lot of uncertainties in that particular area, but to stay on top of the science is needed, and to be proactive when the time is right. You know, again, I think you're always better ahead, you know, to do proper planning and be proactive than to be trying to recover from some sort of, you know, hardship later on. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that one.
Okay.
Brad, may I add something?
Sure. Who is this?
Kepler.
Oh, hi, David. Sure, go
Yes.
ahead, David. Go ahead.
Thank you. It turns out tomorrow at 8:30, I'm meeting somebody named Gary. over
David.
on the Preston Trail to go in and look at the site over there where the pump station is being proposed to get water up to the highlands, or a duplicate pipeline. But we're right in here. We're mixed. It's all mixed up. What could be for our park trails, and the site's a mess. It's had camping on it for years. There's garbage all over and the rest. But there's all kinds of invasive plants. But there's springs coming out of the hills, so we have year-round water in these wetlands and real small creeks and ponds. So there's a lot of chance for habitat. We want to get trails that go from the Preston Trail up to the highlands, to the western part of the highlands, more of a hiking type trails. So we got a real mix of county, or well, former county land. We got a mix of city park potential, and then public works, stormwater money. If you look at your utility bill, Jeff sees a different one for his, but not being an Issaquah resident, but there's sections there. There's a water section, there's a city sewer section, there's a metro sewer. You know, we pay so much to get it to the metro, and then metro's got to take it from here to Renton and then deal with it all, you know, everything. Then there's a stormwater fee that's part of your water bill as well. And stormwater people can't be out really doing park stuff, but they can, if we can be working with park people and stormwater people, we can get some park-like things that are meeting stormwater goals if we're working well together. And I know that's the intent here, but I want to really emphasize how important it is that the parks and the public works are working together. We all, you know, it drives me nuts to see these the ponds over there on 900 that are for talus that are still owned by the developer, I guess. But you know, they're a big wasteland all around it. Everything's cut down except the invasive plants that are wanting to get there, especially tansy ragwort. But you know but then if you have trees around those ponds, then you're getting leaves and things get, you know, drains get plugged, and it's a whole deal. It's not a simple thing, but I'm really encouraged by just seeing this interface here tonight between public works and parks, and how we can do better and efficiently do better. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank
I
you,
made a
David.
special exception just for you, David, tonight. Okay, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, really appreciate the discussion, Gary, Alan. Thank you so much for this. I just want to reiterate a couple of things. You know, as this is the Surface Stormwater Master Plan, we so appreciate Public Works taking that long view, and are really excited to assist and aid in taking that long view with them as well. And as we've certainly worked with the community and tried to take that long view with the park strategic plan. And I think, Gary, you touched on this a little bit too, and that, you know, a lot of this is sort of look to find near-term solutions. It's so valuable to take the long view and to understand, as we look at really, really important stormwater infrastructure to protect the environment, as we look at really, really important investments in park infrastructure to encourage livability. There's opportunities for creative solutions that might serve multiple benefits. And that's where we really, I just look forward to this journey. This isn't a one-time discussion. This is hopefully something that we continue and embark on. And long-term strategic plans aren't meant to just gather dust on a shelf. They really, I think, set a goal, set some policies, begin to set some habits to find those near-term opportunities to do some new stuff. One last comment I would add to your prioritization, Gary and Alan, is you mentioned ownership, land ownership, though I think that's a priority, and I would agree to it. I would want to make sure that's not scored as a good or a bad, because I think what we're going to find as we continue on in this endeavor, there might be strategic acquisition opportunities that could serve both an acquisition benefit and a park benefit. So it's not necessarily how do we just stuff in what we already have, but how do we find those strategic public investments to do multiple good? So thank you again both for being here.
Yes, thank you, Gary and Alan, both.
You're welcome.
So we'll see you again. So,
Yes, look forward to it.
okay, appreciate your help tonight.
Bye.
So let's move on to the next opportunity here. And Bill, I'm sorry we had a bit of a glitch, but we'll see whether or not part 2 here works any better. So can we hear you, Bill?
Can you?
Go ahead and say something, Bill.
Hi. Can you hear
There
me?
we are. I don't hear any echo either, so I think we're good. And also, Melissa, if you could re-engage David and Jennifer if they're both still with us so that they can pop in for any comments that they might like to make along the way as well.
Absolutely, that's done.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, you have the floor.
All righty then.
Just let Jennifer know when you want to advance the screen, and high tech will do it.
All right, we can move to the second screen right now.
And there we go.
So I'm on the board of Friends of Lake Sammamish. Jennifer, who's in the background somewhere, is the executive director. I spent the last 3 years, as have several other people on the board. David Kapler is not on the board, but he was a charter member and he's on our trail committee. When we had discussions with the state parks, and they said, you know, with your success having these events on top of activities that are already just people coming in the park, we're maxed out. So it'd be great if you folks could figure out how to increase year-round use of Lake Sammamish State Park. And a bunch of us said, oh my gosh, you know, we could improve the trails so they could be year-round trails, which they clearly, for the most part, are not. Another element is ADA practical because we're in flatland. There's huge constraints. Half the park is wetlands. We've got, you know, I don't know how, a mile of lake frontage. We've got 4 different streams coming through. Anytime you do improvements to existing trails that are in wetlands, you can't put fill in for various local, state, and federal regulations, but you can put boardwalks in. But boardwalks are extremely expensive. So we also wanted to self-mitigate as we went with these various trail proposals and think twice about, you know, do we really need this trail or that trail, and maybe use decommissioning as a mitigation strategy to move forward. There's internal and external connectivity. Internal, obvious. External, how do we match up with city trails? Next slide. So this is the 8.5 by 11 or shot to whatever size that shows the various recommendations in the park for trail improvements, and then at the bottom it spells out the a brief on the 14 recommendations, which I'll be elaborating next. Go ahead to the next. The first project is we have a boardwalk that goes to the mouth of Issaquah Creek and connects up to the lower, the footbridge, and then follow Issaquah Creek Trail to the footsteps of Microsoft / commercial business park. And unlike most of the projects, this one has a lack of wetlands. And so we get a lot of bang for the buck by building this and by getting it to the doorstep of a business park. And then I'll show you momentarily the notion of putting the notion on to do improvements to make a trail through the business park. So next slide. Consistent with that, there's a parallel trail on the northeast side that goes out to the mouth of Issaquah Creek that until the pandemic hit was pretty non-existent, and we proposed to decommission it because it's duplicative, and we couldn't, you know, what are we going to put two boardwalks out through the wetlands, and so decommission it and use it for leverage to build other projects. Next slide. So we came up with this notion of a gravel bar trail, and just before we went to press, I heard a presentation by Mountain Sound Greenway. They wanted to reactivate this oxbow for hydraulically as part of their project for doing stream restoration within Lake Sammamish State Park. So it's a little over a mile of Issaquah Creek. One of the components is this. So we thought, well, we don't want to get in their road, so we pulled it, and so this is kind of a floater right now. It would be neat to have a gravel bar trail somewhere, but we have not identified a specific location. Next slide. So this was I mentioned first the off-site trail that is through a business park at the end of the first leg of Issaquah Creek Trail that would go on the north side, so that people that work there could, instead of running across the street and sidewalks, they'd actually have a trail, and that trail would connect to East Lake Sammamish Regional Trail on one side and to Lake Sammamish State Park on the west side. So leverage, and whether or not they would have an interest, but you get to one step, and then you can maybe get leverage to make something big happen offsite. Next slide. And then at the continuation of Issaquah Creek Trail, upper Issaquah Creek Trail that goes from the steps of the business park to Southeast 56th Street would be kind of cool to do, but there's a lot of complicating factors. The Issaquah Creek is eroding into the trail. It's got a lot of dog legs in it that go into wetlands that happen to be during a flood event. It's backwaters of Issaquah Creek, and it's off property. It's on actually corporate park property, and then we get back onto what is now Lake Sammamish State Park property that was as a result of gifting from Lakeside Industries. It's a 5-acre on the south end. So it's an exciting project, but probably not top notch right now because it's complicated. It's going to take a lot of design thought, and it's going to be expensive. So let's do something a little bit less expensive first. Next slide. Somewhere or another we skipped here. We should be back some way back. It should be like 5 or 6. Still more. Closer. One. Yeah, okay, so so just one click down. Bingo. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. Somehow we're hopping around.
Hang on here, Bill. We got technical issues here with Jennifer.
Okay. Can I keep talking?
You can, but without slides.
That's fine. So right now there's no crosswalk that connects 3 major elements of Lake Sammamish State Park. There's Tibbetts Beach Park parking lot. There's Sunset Beach and Sunset Beach parking lot, and there's the kitchen shelter in its parking lot, but there's no crosswalk, and there's no like definition. So if people have like an event at one location, it's like, well, how do you connect? How, you know, it's like a big deal for overflow issues, overflow parking. So if you have, regardless of trail networks, that should be there. Okay, so there, that's where we want to be. Bingo. That's it. So there's a crosswalk, and then there's internal loop that picks up from kitchen shelter out toward the Orchard Loop Trail, and then back again to Sunset Beach. And we think we have a grant to do the first leg of that. That'll come out in the next day or so. Next slide. So this is decommissioning the middle segment of Homestead Creek. It's on the south flank. Issaquah Creek. The creek has taken the trail out twice, and at this point, it's a vertical wall, 12 feet high. Good thing to fall off and drown. And it's bumped up against the wetland mitigation site that WSDOT had, and it's taken out the pedestrian bridge for what's called Pickering Stream, and it's sitting now in the middle of Creek Trail. And State Parks they think they have a $2.1 million grant that's we have to match for. I'll elaborate more on that. But so next slide. So we're going to hop over to the boat launch trail. When the State Parks acquired the property for the boat launch and then developed the boat launch, that created a situation where they were trying to figure out how to get equipment from A to B, the main body of the park, to the boat launch for maintenance instead of going on city roads. So that there's a nice trail there, but that nice trail happens to be almost exclusively in legal wetlands. The add-on to boat launch trail, next slide, is a link from where the existing trail comes out to the boat launch, and then build a new trail, likely boardwalk, from that point to East Lake Sammamish Trail. This has great connectivity issues, but it also has offering of, like, oh boy, if I was a bicyclist, I could take a shortcut, and then you got people with children, and you got whatever else, bird watchers and whomever, so you have potential conflicts. So how do you keep the contradiction, the complication out of that? Next slide. And then flipping to the other side, connecting to City of Issaquah, is improvements to I-90 and Northwest Sammamish Road, and the connector off a sidewalk or whatever to allow people to come into the park from the southwest corner of the park, and then also the notion of having a pedestrian flyover on or about around Tibbetts. So that would also be a city-led, pretty expensive proposition. Next slide. Then on the south flank of Lake Sammamish State Park is Northwest Sammamish Road and Northwest Sammamish Road Trail. So there's a 10-foot wide concrete trail that's inside to the north of the sidewalk. When I was out in the, walking this with Jeff, he said, well, there's no bicycle lane. So now you got a pedestrian. So the notion here maybe would be, maybe it's the city works, the state parks, and they say, look, how about this 10-foot wide concrete trail could be for pedestrians, and the sidewalk could be signed for bicyclists. So next slide. And last but not least, this linkage issue of coming from East Lake Sammamish Regional Trail on the north side of Southeast 56th Street, whether or not this is a missing link. There's a bicycle lane and there's a sidewalk. I've seen, particularly on weekends, where you have families of bicyclists, they're going across the intersection to the north or across the intersection south on East Lake Sammamish Regional Trail, but they're not going west on Southeast 56th Street toward Lake Sammamish State Park. So there's something missing here as far as people. I don't think they want to put their children on that bicycle lane, and then why would they be putting their children on the little bicycles on the sidewalk? So whether or not we could figure something out, this all kind of relates to alternative pathways if for fast bicycles and maybe slow bicycles to not short circuit through the park, which could be problematic, you know, for everybody else but the cyclists, you know, on a boardwalk, 5-foot wide boardwalk, or what, you know, people going fast on a bicycle and everybody else going slow. Next slide. So that's all the identified specific projects, and I just wanted to briefly just kind of touch on different types of trail surfacing potential. Asphalt versus compacted gravel to achieve our ADA, whether asphalt would be more in the developed part of the park versus the wildlands, whether asphalt's clearly more expensive, but O&M, volunteers could help with patching gravel. They couldn't help with patching blacktop. And out in the hinterland, because half the site is wetland, you know, you might figure out how to build a blacktop trail that goes blacktop, boardwalk, flat, asphalt boardwalk, and it's like, well, that's great. You know, we got the equipment there, but then when we need to patch, how do we drive through the wetland alongside the boardwalk in order to patch the asphalt on the other side of it? So it's problematic in terms of maintenance. Reduce asphalt and the length of the site that's half wetland. Next slide. Now they're looking at various bridges. You guys have had plenty of experience with pedestrian bridges. David took this picture of Merritt's Bridge on Tiger Mountain. You can see a log hit that and it didn't make much of a dent. So we're out in the middle, you know, we're having to think about, you know, cottonwood falling down on these things. I mean, these things are monster trees. Bellevue Botanical has a really cool bridge, cable stayed. Next slide. And then various boardwalks. Do we put, and just like with boardwalks or trails or for footbridge, I hadn't even thought about this for footbridge till I was at Bellevue Botanical during the pandemic last winter, taking a picture, but it was like, there was another couple on the other side of the bridge. We had a line of sight, you know, I don't want to cross paths with them on a 5-foot wide. We waited till they crossed and then we crossed. Now, if you have two wheelchairs, and everybody says, well, okay, it has to be wheelchair accessible. That means you have to too wide, or do you have to pull out? Well, you know, so, and that, how does that relate to cost? Well, you add another foot. Does that add another, you know, $300,000 to the bridge? Same thing with boardwalks and trails. The other element about boardwalks is beaver proofing. And designing so that we don't have, like the discussion I had earlier about stormwater management is like, you know, well, we have a problem, so let's because of our infrastructure, and you know, a boardwalk could become the next infrastructure, and we'll get rid of the beaver because we got a boardwalk we've invested in. Well, let's design the boardwalk so it really doesn't matter what a beaver does. So you just think about that, and we have one spot in particular with cross Altitude Trail where it's going to cross paths with this little creek that comes in from Pickering that has beavers in it, and you know there's a 3.5-foot difference with a dam going in. So you have to think about that when you design boardwalk. Next slide. And lastly, having continuity between signs, between the city signs, state park signs. Do we all the signs talk about fish? How about some signs about history, a sign about wildlife, birds, you know, another one about fish, but history. So there's all kinds of topics, and then, but make consistent layout so people don't look at this thing looking like they're totally confused and lost and give up. Other thing on the right is donor thanks, which is an issue with state parks. They don't know. I think they can't give private parties recognition. So, like, how is this going to work? We're trying to boost this whole notion about building trails and getting monies so that we can jack this thing up and make it happen. And we're going to preclude the private sector, because I mean, maybe they could donate out of their own volition, but my take is they would like to have some recognition. So how do we do that? Next slide. So this is the last slide. Some discussion about sequential trail items versus independent. First projects, most bang for the buck. Let's think through and make sure we're not going to have unintended consequences with speed bicycle commuters blowing through the park as a shortcut. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that the 2.1 million for the bridge loop, it looks like state parks will get, and Flex will have to match that with getting $100,000. And then the other one, this community grant thing, is likely $250,000 for the kitchen filter trail that goes 1,100 feet, including 200 feet of boardwalk through a little wetland that we'll have to do an $82,000 match. Lastly, and I think I forgot at the very beginning, you know, how we got started with this. Nikki Fields of State Parks let us 4 retired guys run with this thing to come up with it. They don't have the money, and I'll tell you, I mean, you know, we've got, it's not just David Kapler and me, it's Rick Benson, who's run the park there for 25 years, and Kit Ledbetter, who was the parks director for SeaTac for 22 years or whatever. So, I mean, you can't buy a consultant's help like what we got. So when the city of Issaquah and city of Sammamish donate money to keep flips alive, and if we can make something happen, they're getting darn good value out of their investment. Because right now, us 4 guys are free, but we've got talents that you can't buy. Question and answers? Questions?
Very nice, Bill. Nice presentation. Really nice slideshow. Really like all the visuals. I guess my question to get started would be, you know, what's your thoughts on total funding of this plan, and maybe a timeline in terms of how long you think it would take to actually pull it together?
Well, we described it as a 30 to 40 year plan. We've been working on this thing for 3 years, and we came up with estimates last fall, winter, and the price tag is just under 10 million for internal costs, not another, throw in another 10 million for a pedestrian bridge over I-90. You know, or I mean, these things can pile up, but that's just standard stuff. You know, boardwalk costs in 2021, trail costs at 6 foot wide, compacted. I've had a lot of experience doing estimating in a former life. I don't, you know, we hustle around and chew the fat with people that do this currently. It's a lot of money, but and not everything's going to happen 1, 2, 3, and who knows what eventual costs will be. But we got a lot of hustle and I think we've got a lot. There's a lot of business people in Issaquah, and there's a lot of community-minded people in Issaquah who and we view our task as brainstorming and driving state parks to a quicker and more thoughtful future instead of putting things on an idea, let's have another meeting level. So that's what we did with the playground. That was before my time there, but it's the same strategic approach to boost things along. And I think we have enough for experience also with environmental workarounds, and like, why would you run a this or that when you could mitigate by doing this? And it was like, oh, so I think we've got a pretty darn good sharp pencil to get grants, to get support for those grants matching, and then turnkeying, and then goosing state parks along to design and build it. And then hopefully be in some kind of position to say, wait a minute, like, what are you saying? I mean, even with this thing that I think we got, is like, I overlaid the wetland map with a trail map, and it's like, well, if I go 20 feet to the south on that trail, I can miss a little dog leg of wetland G, which means that I don't have to build a boardwalk that just saved me $200,000, meaning that when I applied for the grant, I showed $200,000 less than we needed, which is a heck of a lot more reasonable than what I asked for. So these are the kind of tricks of the trade that hopefully we can be useful to state parks and can circumnavigate problems that they otherwise might have trying to push something down the road.
So obviously this is a long-term project. I assume the initial couple phases are the two grants that you had mentioned with some support.
Right.
Are those the two priorities?
I mean, no. I mean, if we'll see if we get those two grants, but we can rock and roll. I mean, I think this thing that Jeff came up with about interfacing state parks and the city, and on the south flank, and putting signing and saying, well, this is where bicycles can go because there's no bicycle lane, and this is where pedestrians can go. I mean, like, so it's like the whole crosswalk thing. Now, why didn't anybody think of that? I don't know why they didn't think that they needed a crosswalk. It just never occurred to them. So same thing, we can like make stuff happen on the whole south flank for $3,000. All it is putting up some signs from 10th Street west. I don't know what the distance is, but so there's all kinds of things we could make happen. And letting you guys know, well, it'd be cool if we had a trail off northwest Sammamish on the west flank. The state's going to have to reconstruct that road anyway, and they're going to have to put sound barriers, and they're going to widen I-90, and it's like, well, of course we could do that, but if nobody pops the question, nothing's going to happen.
So the overall intent is for this to be a part of the redeveloped plan that the state is putting together, master plan?
Exactly. Yeah, we're trying to do a double up and feed them so that they go through as a descriptor in their master plan alternatives, and then it goes into their SEPA, and then if we get ahead, if we get a grant and they're still working on their EIS, then we want to move forward, then we write our own individual SEPA checklist and submit it to the city of Issaquah Planning.
Okay.
And when I say we, this really goes back to, Nikki Fields and James
Right.
Company and the SEPA person that's with state parks. But
Right.
if we can be useful to all the above, then, you know, we can grease the skids for them.
Jennifer or David, do you want to add anything?
Yes, we've spent quite a bit of time on the ground there at the park, and the map you see is kind of a stylized map. As Bill pointed out, if we can avoid a few feet of boardwalk, will actually cost as much as quite a bit of that gravel trail. And if you've been up at Tradition Plateau, one of the first American with Disabilities Act trails in the region was that around the lake trail up there. And it's still, it's narrower than we're talking about, but it's amazing how well it's done. It's got washed out a few times by plug culverts that came and that, but where it didn't have that problem, it's taken maintenance, but it's an amazingly great surface. And, you know, just anytime, I mean, 10 feet of boardwalk, you can do a couple 100 feet of gravel. It is amazing how expensive boardwalk is, because if it's in a wetland, you're going to have to go down a bit to get to something solid. And then you know, it's just really expensive. So anything we can do to really figure this thing out well is key. And the problem on Southeast 56 and the bike issue there is some of those are wooden, and people, when it gets a little icy or wet even, bikes crash. So that's where the bikes are on the concrete next to 56 and the pedestrians in that way. So or it could be, we can just get some signage would really improve right there.
Yeah, I guess my two, it'd be really nice to add some gravel turnpikes in a few areas that are really wet, so at least some of those trails could be used year round and wouldn't really cost that much to actually make that more usable. Jennifer, you have any comment?
No, I just, now we're just really looking to engage all of our community partners, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this to you. This is actually the first time I've seen Bill present this. So he's done all the hard work. Now comes, you know, the outreach and the fundraising, which is really the easy part, because I think it's a great project.
Well, that's your cup of tea out down there, fundraising, right? So it looks like.
Hopefully, we'll see. I think if you have a good project, it's easy, and I think this is a good project. So
this is for
something
sure
that benefits the whole community.
Agreed. Any board members have any questions or comments? Chris, go ahead.
Here we go. Well, thank you. It's been a while since I've been at any of the FLIS meetings, but I want to comment that I hope sorry, you can't hear me very well?
It's okay, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay. I saw Jeff leaning in. I think it's important to recognize the significance of that park in our area. You know, it's massive, and it's this big green beauty. If you squint your eyes and try to envision, you know, 100 years from now, it will be something that will be, you know, infinitely more valuable. The folks on the board at FLIS, that's kind of where I got some of my start in park projects, and you know, being more of a community participant. That park does attract a very powerful, high quality, giving, talented group of people. And so I just want to say that I think it's important that the Issaquah Parks continues to coordinate with them. They will, that park will only be an ever more important portion of what else remains in the city. And whatever we can, I know our budgets are not overflowing, but whatever we can do to coordinate support, I advocate.
Agreed. Thanks for that, Chris. Anybody else have a comment or question?
Just one topic Connie has brought up with me a few times is trying to connect the soccer field area to the orchard, there by the trail to the orchard, or there by the kitchen or something. And I was in there today just checking it out, and those fields just got to be a few inches above above the water table in some places. It's difficult in there, and the drier parts are blackberries higher than my head, and but that's where we they help to identify where a trail could be in terms of the blackberries. And you get in there now and you see the patches of canary grass are all yellow and dead, but the new canary grass is popping up. You see that, you know, that's wetland there, and that's going to be hundreds of dollars a foot for boardwalk. So you got to be really looking and seeing what we can do to make this whole thing work.
Well, thanks so much, Bill and Jennifer and David, for giving us this presentation tonight. It was very appreciative, and I know we're just kind of getting started with it, but you've laid the groundwork for a really good plan for the future. And now Jennifer just needs to find the money. Jennifer and her team just needs to find the money. Okay, thank you. We need to get moving on. Appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay with us if you'd like, or move ahead. I know it's getting late for you.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay, you bet.
Okay.
So we're on to our third agenda item this evening, which is the 6-year CIP. And Jeff and Jennifer, it looks like this is up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Jennifer, thanks for showing the presentation. Given the time, I'm gonna give a really quick abbreviated overview so we can have some conversation about the CIP. Before I do that, though, I just want to commend Bill and Dave Kapler and Kit Ledbetter and the work they did with that trail plan. Yeah, obviously that's work that's going to be shepherded and folded into the state park master plan, but you know, certainly know, and I want to reiterate, you know, the interface that our system has, the interface our park strategic planning effort, whether it's the Issaquah Creek corridor or just how we connect to the state park is integral. And so that's certainly a big thank you I want to give to them, and a relationship we want to continue to foster not only with FLIS, but with state park staff. Because as you said, Chris, you're right, that park is going to play a substantial role, a significant role in the value of Issaquah's park system well into the future, well beyond any of us, whether it's trails, whether it's the beach, whether it's soccer fields, baseball fields, etc. So thank you. So on to our capital planning. Yeah, again, I'm going to do this sort of improv, since I'm going to abbreviate it pretty quickly. As this slide shows, the 6-year CIP that's proposed before council and that many of you heard introduced to them, the parks and trails element of that did not come out of thin air. It originated directly out of the park strategic plan effort that you really helped to steer, the community engagement that we had, establish projects and establish priorities for those projects, and that serves as the foundation of the CIP. Next slide, Jen. You heard this the other night. The CIP is not a budget. It's a planning tool. It really is a way for the city to begin to map out and understand its long view needs for public infrastructure, and what a 6-year window for those long view needs begin to look like. How revenues align with those infrastructure needs. That CIP is updated every 2 years. We're getting into a really nice pattern and sequence that I want to point out to you as we've adopted that 2018 Park Strategic Plan. We have a really good cycle now that the engagement effort that goes with that strategic plan really sets that long year, much like the trails plan that you just saw for the state park. That's a 30-year vision. But it begins to serve as that foundation for the 6-year priorities. As you remember, with our park strategic plan, projects were prioritized near term, midterm, and long term. As we went through that scoring exercise, the near term projects out of the park strategic plan became the foundation, became the projects for the 6-year Parks and Trails CIP that you see there. For anyone who's listening or watching this, you'll notice the 2 link tabs to the documents on that presentation. Those are direct links to those complete documents. So we'll certainly have those up as this agenda lives on our website. Taking you back to the park plan, this wasn't meant as foreshadowing, but it was meant to sort of present what is ideal as we begin to modernize our planning efforts with the city. This, you may remember, came directly out of the park strategic plan on one of the later pages of the document that tried to identify what's the role of this park strategic plan. It doesn't magically make things happen, but it serves as the foundation. As you see, it informs what previous finance department wanted as a 5-year CIP is now a 6-year CIP, but it's the same thing. It informs capital planning and funding strategy, which then informs adopted budgets, annual budgets, both operating and capital, which then informs our effort to make these capital investments and really engage in the community and scope those in a more fine-tuned way in terms of designing them. And then ultimately, we produce capital projects that, again, are born out of this foundational work and not just randomly selected. Next slide, Jen. This project, this page came directly out of the Park Strategic Plan as well. These were all the projects, as if you recall, as we went through community engagement and where we saw opportunities, needs for reinvestment into the system. If you remember the prioritization tool that was used and the scoring that was done to put these projects into these near-term, midterm, long-term buckets. Again, as I said earlier, those near-term projects then really became the Parks and Trails 6-year CIP. That you saw presented last night. We'll begin having discussions with the City Council about some of the factors that we were asked to take on, and Jennifer Fink and I took on as we began to fine tune this, is we had to really look at what revenues are available, and in particular in 2022 and 2023. How does the rubber meet the road in those projects? Again, not that this is a budget document per se, but it is something that's going to directly inform the 2022 capital budget request that's going to go to council later this fall. Which projects are ready? What is our staffing capacity and cadence to be able to complete projects in the public engagement? And then ultimately, what's council's priorities as they adopt not only the CIP, but they will also adopt each of the annual budgets. Next slide, Jen. The funding sources, this is a page directly out of the CIP. The finance department spoke to this as well. I'm not going to touch on each one of these revenue sources, but other than to say the CIP is really an effort to be very intentional about how much can we afford as we look at not only the Parks and Trails CIP, but our stormwater needs, our transportation needs, our facility needs, our water utility needs. How do we spread what feels like realistic revenue over the 6-year planning document? This represents the proposed revenue amounts in each of these revenue sources that are going into the draft 6-year CIP. Of note, in terms of Parks and Trails funding, we're not eligible for all of these revenues. Our primary revenue sources are the real estate excise tax. Under the mitigation impact fees, you'll see park impact fees are obviously a revenue source that needs to go to new capacity. It can't just go to funding and not creating existing capacity. Bike and pedestrian impact fees can also go towards trail projects. The utility revenues really are for those enterprise utilities. We're not eligible for those utility revenues. Obviously, grant funds, we're pretty ambitious in how we go about grants. I would note that in the 2022 and 2023 projects for the Parks and Trails CIP, we did not, the only grant revenues that we projected into those projects were grant revenues we already had. Grants take a while to get. Grants take a while to get agreements once you're awarded the grant. And so we wanted to be as project ready as we could with those 2022 and 2023 projects. Next slide. And then this is the draft, the summary page of that 6-year CIP. Again, projects not randomly selected, but came right out of the prioritization exercise that we went through with all of you in the community with the Park Strategic Plan. Again, of note, well, I'm going to leave it at that. Looking at the clock. Next slide, Jen. I think we're on to just questions and discussion. Again, I want to save enough time to hear discussion from all of you. Any questions, any overviews of this? Again, thank you for the work that we started 2 or 3 years ago on this effort and the Park Strategic Plan and the prioritization that went there, because that is really what has been informing this CIP work. There's a study session and conversations with the City Council begin tomorrow evening. In fact, Tuesday the 27th, we'll begin our CIP discussions with Council that'll likely go through May. You've been asked and invited to provide feedback. It doesn't have to happen all tonight, but I know through this effort in discussions with the Council, they're very open and receptive and wanting to get feedback from you as the Park Board. So with that, thank you.
So not everybody has their camera on, so I can't necessarily see your hand if it's raised. So if you have a question or a comment, you either put your camera on or put it in chat. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I have a few, but I'll defer to the board first.
I just wanted to quick say if you need me to pull the presentation back up, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Not seeing any hands, so I'll get the ball rolling here a little bit. Jeff, it was interesting when we actually, the fair amount of the board was in attendance at the council meeting. One of the slides that kind of grabbed my attention was the one where all the different departments had their hand out wanting to kind of grab a part of funding. Could you talk a little bit about, it was interesting to actually see each one of the departments, what their 6-year plan funding allocation or project plan was. Parks really stuck out as having the greatest number, which didn't surprise me too much, but how does the council go about allocating, or do they allocate to the various departments? Is there a percentage of allocation? How does that work?
There's not a percentage-based allocation, no, and that would be pretty rare. Most cities don't do that. I think the slide you're remembering, if I recall, spoke to real estate excise tax and general fund, sort of those revenue sources that are really need to be balanced and have competing needs of all those different, not only, and I don't think the slide was meant to really be department based, but more in a sense of capital infrastructure, right? We have parks and trails infrastructure that the community wants. We have obviously transportation road infrastructure that also gets funded and competes for real estate excise tax money. I'm trying to remember what the other hands were. Facilities, right? And some of our facilities related needs that the community wants also compete for that. So it really comes down to every budget cycle, right? That, that becomes some of those hard decisions, is how do you take that, I wouldn't say finite, but that revenue stream and prioritize it with a greater and higher need.
So essentially what you have planned for 22 and 23, you just submit as a part of your proposed budget, and then the council figures out how they want to somewhat apportion available funds that way?
Yeah, in terms of a specific, again, this is not a budget. So we didn't prepare this as a budget, the 6-year CIP, but as we now prepare a budget request for 2022, yeah, it's it's discussions, it's understanding priorities of the mayor and administration. That is ultimately the mayor's budget that the mayor proposes to the city council for their council deliberation and ultimately the council adoption. So it's working with the mayor, it's working with the finance department, it's working with other departments to understand what's in everyone's capital improvement plan. I think that's why it's so important, as I was saying earlier, the 2022 and 2023 CIP projects. Those are all based on anticipated revenue for 2022 and 2023. Those would all be able to be funded. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So as the 22 CIP, the CIP for the year 2022 is not setting up to be a competition. It's saying, hey, there's already some prioritization that happened, and these projects in 2022 across all of these important spectrums of infrastructure could be funded in this way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Could you explain a little bit about the dog park? So I see nothing for 2022, but 45,000 in 2023, and then over 500,000 in 2024. So could you explain, first of all, actually why the dog park isn't necessarily more of a priority, since we've been working on that for some time, and how those years are playing out, and then what's the intention of a big amount in 2024?
Again, I want to reiterate, this is a planning document, so it's not a budget ask.
I know.
I think the dog park definitely remains a priority. I think as we recognize staffing capacity, and again, that balance of where do we spend revenue and how do we balance realistic revenue, something we've talked with administration about is the dog park tour. As we've initiated the dog park tour, what does it look like to continue that dog park tour, not only remainder of 2021, but into 2022? And then in 2023, I believe, do we have the 45,000 requested in 22 or 23, Jennifer?
23, I think.
In 23, yeah. Right? So probably having still having a dog park tour, but engaging the community with, hey, what did we learn? What have we learned through this dog park tour exercise? What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? We also have master planning work that we need to do at Tibbetts Valley Park before I think, feel we can just proceed and jump into what was proposed at Tibbetts Valley Park. So let's take this cumulative community engagement we've been having with the dog park tour, and let's be intentional with the community and what should be at Tibbetts Valley Park. Should it be at Tibbetts Valley Park? The $500,000 request, again, as a planning document, it's a placeholder, and trying to be realistic and pragmatic with, I want the community to be able to express what is really going to work for an off-leash dog park, or maybe it's multiple off-leash dog parks, because it's really tough to find one big off-leash dog park in this community. So again, a planning document, it's meant to I think map out that. So it's, I hope it's not, I can see that it on its surface could be, boy, it's not a priority. It remains a priority. I think we have some learning to do, and we have some planning to do with the rest of Tibbetts Valley Park.
Thanks for that. I suspected all of what you said, but I thought it was good for everybody to kind of hear some clarity, since that's been one of our kind of #1 projects over the last couple of years anyway.
And Brad, I just wanted to add, with any project, we know there's a planning period and a permitting process that goes with that. And so that's kind of how this was phased out, knowing there's a permitting and further design process that would need to occur before the actual construction. So that's why you see it in 2 years like that.
Okay. Other questions or comments about the CIP? Anyone? Seeing any hands? Not seeing anything in chat. Jeff, I understand the board actually needs to make some kind of recommendations to the council in a meeting in May. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say recommendations. I would say feedback, right? I mean, if there's any feedback that the board has, and we can continue to work on that. Certainly, Brad, with you and Linda as chair and vice chair, and get feedback from the board. But yeah, I think there's interest in it, you know, what is the feedback of this group? I hope we find this helpful, and that in some ways this is sort of closing a feedback loop that, hey, you all as a board helped to create the foundation that created the 6-year CIP, and here's how this 6-year CIP mirrors that strategic plan that we helped to build. So whether it's feedback on that, whether it's feedback on revenues, whether it's feedback on specific projects, it could that could take whatever form that you all feel. I know we've had a busy night tonight. I've appreciated the collaborative conversations we've had with our other partners, but we've got a couple weeks to try and maybe build some feedback from the whole group. Marlene has her hand up.
Marlene?
Hey guys, thanks. Yeah, and it was a lot of listening today and a lot of information, so that could be the the energy of the group, or at least how I'm feeling. I think what would really help me is, as opposed to just a broad, like, what feedback do you have? I think maybe if we could have some like pointed questions. Are there certain parts of this CIP that you specifically need feedback on, or something that's different than what we've decided before? Because to be honest with you, it's so much information, I'm having trouble sort of giving you feedback that's helpful. So if you guys could maybe help us figure out where it's really important to have our feedback, or where it might be different than what we've previously decided, that would really help me be able to give you guys better feedback.
Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback.
To some extent, I think it's a matter of what the council, to some extent, would like to hear from us. So it might be good to clarify that.
Yeah. Well, and I guess to touch on one thing you said, Marlene, and I so appreciate, this is new. This represents a whole new again, feedback loop in terms of really getting engagement from boards and commissions on the 6-year CIP, really opening it up in a I think more transparent way. I shouldn't say transparent, but in a more engaging way. And I hope, this is just my hope, that it also will reiterate some of this foundational work that as we start creating habits and create sort of long-range strategic plans, and that those long-range strategic plans, like I said, when Gary Shimmick and Alan were here, they don't just sit on a shelf and gather dust, but they're put into use to create these nearer term prioritization exercises, capital plans, etc. So I think what we're doing really represents a new approach. So your feedback's helpful, Marlene, in terms of, yeah, what helpful questions might aid you all in getting a little more specific, and what is a rather large planning document. You're right.
Even if there's places where you guys were unsure, right? Like if there's like, oh, we really thought about this page, or we really want, I think just pointing us to those will help us a lot. So appreciate you being willing to, or open to thinking through that.
Yeah, I think it's good to engage the board more with this particular planning document. It hasn't really happened too much in the past, and that may have something to do with maybe why a lot of those things may not have been accomplished too in years past. There hasn't been enough engagement. We'll see, but I think it's good to move forward with it. Any other comments or questions on this item? Not seeing anything, so I guess that means we are not seeing anything in chat. So I guess we're moving on to, you want a little bit of a break here, Jeff?
Yeah, chair report, go right ahead, please.
Okay. I just have a couple things. First of all, thanks everybody for your service here this past year. We're really wrapping up this term here at the end of April. Just to give everybody the heads up, basically Danielle and Jeremy and Marlene will be continuing on with us here over the next year. Thank you, April, but she will be concluding her service here at the end of this month. We do have 2 new board members joining us next month. Zach, well, I don't know if I can pronounce his last name. That is Zabluski, maybe. And I think that's April's husband, if I'm not mistaken. So at least April will somewhat stay in the loop with us here as Zach joins us. And then Brenda Spears will be joining us here as well, starting next month. And then we do have 1 position yet to fill that we're going to do what we can to do some outreach here over the next few months for that. We do have elections, leadership elections coming up next month in May, so give some consideration to that, how you would like the board to move forward with leadership. It could be time for change, we'll see. Jeff and I have had some discussion about maybe potentially changing the policy of leadership of boards and commissions. I don't know if that will occur here this go around, but something that we've talked about in terms of, vice chair potentially stepping into the chair position in the following year or something similar to that. So we can talk about that more next month, but give some thought to what you would like moving forward. Couple things. There's a couple things coming out in May that I wanted you to be aware of. The public forums, annual forum for public lands, which occurred last month. I don't know if everybody had a chance to see Sally or not. That's actually now been published on YouTube, which is a good way to view it. If anybody that didn't attend it that would like to see it, let me know. I'll send you a link to watch it. It's a good presentation. And there's now going to be a part 2 of the annual forum for public lands this year, which is going to be a virtual meeting in May. It's set for May 21st on a Friday at 5:30. If you have any interest in attending that, let me know and I'll send you a link with more information about that. The guest speaker is going to be Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary Franz. I'm sure she will have some real positive things to say about some funding, I think, that she was able to get from the legislature for primarily wildfires, but a number of other things. But that will be another good presentation from Commissioner Franz on May 21st. And then the last thing I wanted to mention in May coming up is the Trail Ambassador Program, which is being sponsored by the Issaquah Alps Trails Program, as well as Mountain to Sound Greenway. And primarily this program is getting ambassadors to provide information about trails at various trailheads in our region. If you want any more information about that or have interest in joining that program or know of somebody who would be interested, please let me know and I'll send you some more additional information on that program as well. Given that Issaquah is considered Trail City, I think this will be a very valuable program to inform so many people that join the Issaquah area to use our trail system more responsibly. And so I'm real encouraged to see what comes of that new program. That's all I had to say this evening. So Jeff, I'll leave it with you for a few words.
Great, thanks, Brad. Seeing the clock, I'll be super duper fast. This Saturday marks the beginning of farmers market season for 2021. Pickering Barn will be hopping. We're working with public health once again to create a safe space for the community to gather and get goods, and I think just celebrate another farmers market season. So great work there. I'll save project updates for our May Park Board meeting. We'll be able to have updates on both some of the work we're doing with the community in Blackberry Park, as well as an update on Hillside Park and some of the site work we're doing and continued or site analysis work we're doing and continued community engagement there. Wayfinding, if you remember that from last Park Board meeting, public engagement for that starts tail end of this week as well, and will run for the month of May. So please share with your counterparts and residents and neighbors to provide input for that wayfinding engagement. And lastly, state budget came out, was adopted over the weekend. You probably saw within the capital budget, we are going to be awarded $1.87 million for our Bergsma acquisition. We went through the Washington Wildlife Recreation WWRP grant cycle and scored highly. You may remember that, but that's now going to mean another $1.87 million to assist the city in that acquisition. That wraps up our funding strategy for that project. I just want to note what was a very ambitious endeavor for the city to purchase those acres. We actually met our funding strategy in terms of grant dollars, exceeded it by almost $400,000. So the city contribution for that regional effort ends up being really quite small. So kudos, Jennifer, for that grant application, and I think for the number of grants that we were successful in getting for that project. It also means in the CIP, you'll see for next year funding for doing some trail work. We've been initiating some trail design work already. Once we have that grant agreement and that final grant funding from the state, we'll actually be able to do some capital projects. The first thing we want to do is really reinforce trail connectivity from the valley floor up into Cougar Mountain and beyond. So that's it.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. And Ryan, last but not least, thank you for, I hope we've kept you entertained at least for the last 2 hours here. And
Yeah.
Glad you hung in there with us, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the youth board.
Yeah, so I'll sort of start with where we're going, or where we've been, and then I'll go to where we're going. So this past month, we held a civic engagement conference that was pretty well attended. Councilmember Dee Michelle spoke, as well as some local youth activists who'd been lobbying for a bill in the state legislature. And then we also had one of our project teams host a social justice conference, which was really great. And then in terms of where we're going, this Saturday from 1 to 3, we're hosting a food and book drive at the community center for the benefit of Eastside Baby Corner and the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank. So we're collecting food, books, baby wipes, and bar soap, and we're hoping that that'll be a really great event. We're sort of calling it Fill the Van and hoping to fill up some of the city's vehicles so that we can drive all those great things over to those organizations. And then looking forward to May, Jennifer and I are putting together a presentation to work with the Youth Advisory Board in terms of the wayfinding project, and hopefully getting some engagement, having some discussion with them on that project in the future, and bringing that back to the Parks Board in the future. And that is all I have for now. We are in a new application cycle, so if you have any youth in your life that you think would be interested in the Youth Advisory Board, the application is out on the city's website, and that's all I have.
Thank you for that, Ryan, and appreciate all your contributions. And hopefully you have a few things to be able to pass on to the youth board from what you've learned tonight as well. So thank you for that. Anything from the mayor, Jeff?
Specifically, no. I do know in talking with her that she wants to come out and say hi to all boards and commissions. So I'll be working with her office to see if we can get her scheduled for May or June.
Okay, sounds good. Any new business announcements? Anything along those lines? Not seeing anything. Chat looks empty. Well, thanks for hanging in there. We kind of overdid it a few minutes, but somehow we squeezed everything in. It was a busy night. Appreciate everybody showing up. And have yourself a great spring, and I'll see you all next month. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.